Welcome to the Decentralized Mind Podcast. I'm your host, Emanuela, and today I have the pleasure of recording this podcast episode with Dr. Jack Kruse. As far as I'm concerned, he's the man when it comes to quantum biology, light and circadian rhythms, water, magnetism. Dr. Jack Kruse played a huge role in improving my health, improving my family's health, and completely changing our lives in so many ways. So I am really honored to be able to have this conversation with him. Well, I kind of wanted to start the conversation. I wanted to connect a couple things that I've been connecting about magnetic fields, magnetism, and melanin. And the first thing how I wanted to understand that was about exercise. So can you maybe explain a little bit about the detriments of exercise when somebody's in a place like where I am in Canada, where we have no magnetic field, and
Well, that's not true. You have a magnetic field. It's
for
just
one?
you have one, but it's running away from you and going to Russia. So you need to understand kind of what that means, okay? What that means fundamentally is that your ATPase can't run at 9,000 revolutions per minute. So you should do a hard stop when you say, Jack, I don't understand why exercise for me in Canada is different than, say, for a person in Siberia. Well, you should, because the person in Siberia literally has to do nothing to exercise when their ATPase is getting the huge magnetic boost from the Earth. You, on the other hand, are fighting a battle of maple syrup in your muscles. Why? Remember, and this is the part that the food gurus and the meatheads, the NFL players, except the ones that I work with, when they learn this, they're kind of stunned. Because this explains why all the NFL guys, the NHL guys, they're getting injured. The second largest water compartment in the human body is the muscles. So this means if the water that your mitochondria create doesn't have the right viscosity, you are pushing an ATPase against actin and myosin, and say when it's not favorable on the viscosity because the magnetism is bad, you shred your muscles. So who is this happening to? The best examples, astronauts. That's why when they go up in space, within 7 days, they lose 20% of their muscle mass. Who's the next best person to explain it? Ozempic users, which is the reason why their muscles and their fat mass in their face are being shredded. But here's the counterintuitive one that people like you and people who follow me that get aggravated. If you're a fucking meathead and go into a blue lit gym and exercise there, you're doing the same freaking thing. You're an astronaut on the tectonic plate. And what are you doing? You're trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger against maple syrup, and then you wonder why your heart and your brain fries. That's the reason why NFL players' longevity is knocked down to 64 years old. When they don't get this. Like my NFL players, when they retire, the first thing I do to them is I shred their muscle. I tell them, you have to stop working out. All I want you to do is go to the beach, put your feet on the ground, sit in the sun, do nothing else. And what eventually happens, they're all stunned at. They lose 20-30% of their muscle mass and they're as strong as they were before. They're still able to lift the amount of weight they were able to do when they were studs. But yet, when their friends see them, they're like, how is this possible? And the reason why it's possible is when you understand really how the musculoskeletal system works, okay? It works based on low viscosity water with actin and myosin. That's the real answer that nobody wants to face. And when you understand this, then everything becomes clear to me. It's not like Jack Kruse is against exercise. I'm not. I'm not against, meatheads and doing this and that. But what do I want you to do? If you want to be hypertrophy because you think the chicks and the guys like that, just fucking do it outside in the sun. That's it. That's the real answer.
that's actually one I wanted to ask about, because like someone like me, I want to just feel stronger, and I'm here working out outside barefoot. But when I actually do a workout, I feel worse afterwards. It doesn't help me. And when I heard what you said to,
You know the reason why. You live in
right,
a place that's magnetically declined. So,
right,
what's the correlate of that? Like, if you listen to what you just asked me, the correlate to that, can exercise be a toxin? That's actually what you should have asked me, but didn't.
right.
And
Yes.
the answer is yes. And if you want to be successful at getting these concepts through to the public, because I'm a stickler about this stuff, ask the right question to get the right answer. And the answer is yes. Exercise, just like oxygen, just like water, is a toxin when you understand the biophysics around it. Because everybody thinks all exercise is created equal. No. I'm going to tell you, one of my good friends, Erwin LaCour, he doesn't like to do any of the science, but he's got the national record for free diving. And he runs MoveNet. He's a spectacular human. What has he found? His superhuman abilities have increased when he started free diving. And he asked me, like 10 years ago when he started, Jack, do you think I'm going to have a problem with this? I said, no, you're going to find out that you're even a better athlete deep water. Why? Because he's going to deuterium deplete himself. And he had himself convinced, it's about his breathing and this and that. And I just kind of chuckled at him. I said, dude, you got to learn a lot about the vagus nerve. But you're going to find out what whale seals, dolphins, and whales know. When mammals go deep in the ocean, they're being squeezed by the water above it to get the deuterium out. What does that do? It isotopically defractionates the water, breaks the lattice, like I like to say, and the viscosity of their blood goes from 78 to 160. What does that mean? Because blood is what fuels the vortex in the mammalian brain. Every mammal does it different. We're really special, but they still use it. Their brains work better. This is the reason why anybody that has COVID or what we call long-term COVID, I just tell them, take up scuba diving and get certified. When you do that, you'll find out that you're the smartest fucking guy in the world when you go down in the ground. But when you come back on the surface in Toronto, you're a moron again. And, that's the reason why, I'm being provocative on social media when I call food gurus and biochemists retards, because they are. All of them are. They don't know the basics of what I just told you. And when you understand that biochemistry really is the study of how chemistry works in the viscosity of water, you go, oh, fuck. No wonder Jack is all over their case. Because they don't even understand the substrate that biochemistry is supposed to operate in is also subject to this rule, just like muscles are.
When I think I was reading the Decentralized Medicine series, I think it was 54, that you mentioned really briefly something about magnesium and magnetism. And it just reminded me, and I don't know if I understood it correctly, but it just reminded me of when I was in El Salvador. Typically, I don't tolerate caffeine, but I had some coffee, and I didn't need to take a bunch of magnesium to prevent me from going all jittery.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting thing. Because this is really probably, in my opinion, one of your best questions you asked me. So I put things in blogs to really check my readership to see if they're paying attention. And, I did a Q&A this past Sunday where I admonish all of them. People think that the people that I care about, I don't go after like a great white shark. I do. Why? Because I'm trying to hone their skills so that they can see all the shills that are really around them. So this story about magnesium is a big deal. Why? Because it turns out if you understand the magnetic dynamo, if it weakens, that means it favors things that are heavy, meaning isotopically heavy. Most people don't even understand that magnesium has two forms. And I always show this picture to the members about hemoglobin and chlorophyll, and I tell them the difference is between the atom in the middle, iron versus magnesium. Well, here's what you need to know about magnesium. Magnesium comes in two isotopic forms, 25 and a heavier version. And when you begin to understand that's the case, you start to go, okay, let me think about this. Since magnesium is used in 56 different enzymes around the ATPase, might isotopic variation of the water play a big role on this? And it turns out the answer is yes. And it really works with magnesium. Why? Because what you found is when you came to El Salvador at the 13 north latitude compared to where you probably were at 45, your blood was way thinner. And the reason you could tolerate coffee here is because your blood was thinner, okay? And the magnesium that you were favored using in you was knocked out of your system. You fractionate even magnesium through melanin. And let me explain something to you that everybody makes a mistake at, including you. When I tell people that melanin is designed to isotopically fractionate, I always spend the time on hydrogen, but it also works for magnesium. You're designed to get rid of the heavy isotope of magnesium. You're designed to get rid of the heavy isotope of calcium. If you go to the neurosurgeon, they do a gadolinium scan, it's designed to get rid of that too. So, Emanuela, where do you make more melanin? In El Salvador or Toronto?
Yeah, Salvador.
All right, so guess what? Do you understand that your defractionation program is better in a place where you have more melanin? So if you've been reading the blogs and staying up, what have I told all the members? That the pathway within the leptin-melanocortin pathway that controls this. Everybody that is an influencer or a PhD that's just stealing my work, they teach people about POMC. You know what they don't really understand? That little pathway in there called MITF-AMPAR, that's the key to understanding really what melanin's doing for inside your brain. It is defractionating all the heavy isotopes so that when you're in this environment, your biochemistry is completely different than it is when you go back to Toronto. And what you're experiencing every time you go back to Toronto, because it's magnetically declined, that you're running on heavier isotopes and you don't realize it. You have no clue because you really haven't understood the tracks that Uncle Jack has put down. But when you go back and look at it, after I put Windex on your glass eyes, you go, oh, now I'm starting to begin to understand why we do this. So now let's do the distillation of this lesson in this podcast, because this is really important. So your next question to me should be, Uncle Jack, in a magnetically declining world, what is the goal of every savage who's a mitochondriac out there? Very simply, you have to figure out your N equals 1 in terms of how much magnetic decline can you tolerate, but still have enough MITF-AMPAR to support the melanin in your central nervous system. When you figure that out, then you know exactly where you need to live. Okay? So what has Emanuela already figured out? Canada is not for Emanuela. Okay? That's what you basically have told me in the first 10 minutes of this podcast. So then my question to you, and I don't want you to answer this on your own podcast, but the reason why this is important for my members and people who will listen to this is, do you understand now why I give people the hard time that I give them in our membership? Because they never seem to get this little thing. They keep forgetting that their biochemistry operates differently in each magnetic environment they're in. And what's the key to the MITF-AMPAR system? If you're spinning against maple syrup, it's harder to make melanin. And what does it do? It degrades into dopamine when that happens. So when you figure out where you need to be, then you need to go to that area and fucking stay there until you fix your problem. And here's the problem that people find. And this is the thing that I don't want to say is aggravating me, but the people have paid me a lot of money to be my personal patients. when they get the answer and they get better and then they go back to the environment and they die, it fucking pisses me off. Like, I've talked about one of my members who's now dead, 44-year-old beautiful woman from the UK with breast cancer. She went out past the window of 5 years, which in centralized medicine, they tell you, if you get outside the 5-year window, you're cured. So what did she do? She didn't listen to me. She went back to the environment, got her sick, and she was dead within a year. What doesn't she understand? She doesn't understand, or didn't understand, because she's now past tense, what I just explained to you in the beginning of this podcast and how fucking important that is. Like, you're talking to me about fucking exercise, which is a waste of time. But this was her life and her death. So I'm going to make this really real for you, Emanuela, because I hope she's listening to this. We have a current member who I just fired within the last week. And you know who I'm talking about, right? Now you know why I fired her, right? Because I know what she doesn't know, and she never fucking got the lesson. And you know what? I don't have time for that anymore. Why? Because a girl like you, who's in Toronto, who clearly is getting the message, who's now started to do podcasts going, I want to tell the other retards out there what I'm really learning. Well, I got to be honest with you, that is the reason I do what I do. But you have to realize something. All of you have to realize something. I have spent 25 years figuring this shit out. And many times I've done things to myself that I shouldn't have done, but I had to do it to figure out, was I right or was I wrong? Now that the key papers have all come out in the last 2 or 3 years, I am brutal for people. Why? Because I know I'm right. And now I'm not going to hold my tongue. And I'm going to fire members who don't get it. Like, if you don't listen to my advice and you are a paying customer, I will show you the door. Because my members have gotten the highest signal information from me than anybody else. Not the idiots on Twitter, not LinkedIn, nobody else. I give you everything I have, everything I've learned. Now, Emanuela, when you have a conversation with somebody, you know what your intent is, but you don't know what the idiot on the other end of the phone line is hearing. So the reason I'm laying this out for you, because I think it's really important, is when the person on the other end of the line is getting high signal and they still don't get it, centralized medicine tells the clinician to hang up. Because I need to help people that really do get it. And that is the reason why I'm engaging with you here on this, so that you understand that your simple little question about actin and myosin and ATPase, or the biochemistry at El Salvador and Toronto, why they're different, you will understand that at least 2 ladies have made catastrophic decisions that are probably going to end their life. One of them's already dead. My bet is the other one will be dead. And did I fire another member this week? Same exact thing, but a different problem. That was about bipolar disorder. Okay? I'm just going to tell you. In fact, I'm going to tell you the third one. I fired another member, and this one is actually, I said this to Alexis Callan, this one probably bothered me more than anything else. This is a member who's been with me since 2012, who put her house up for sale in Australia. I should say, put her house up for sale in El Salvador, in Atami, and is moving back to Australia. So you can't give Jack Kruse a bigger fuck you than that. When I have spent 13 years teaching you all signal, no noise, and now all the papers are out that show you that my intuition from 25 years ago was correct. Why? Because I stopped paying attention to Rockefeller medicine that I was taught and started to pay attention to a new teacher called Mother Nature, whose recipe is based around a Lagrangian equation that uses light, water, and magnetism. And it turns out, to understand that situation right now, it's actually easier for you, Emanuela, living in Canada, to understand this. Why? Because now you know you're in a magnetically declined place. And you have visited a magnetically inclined place. One of the things going on the forum right now that I actually hope, after having this discussion with me, that you go back and look at. There's a guy on our forum named Matt from Australia. He's an electrical engineer. He's posting some really interesting stuff, and he's very conflicted by the stuff that you and I are talking about right now. And I think after the Alexis Callan podcast and after the April Q&A of 2026, because you heard what I said on that podcast, I said, someday down the road when I'm dead, people are going to come back and listen to that Q&A and go, fuck. Like, he's been telling us the same story, and the problem is we haven't been listening at all. Matt is beginning to understand the biggest signal on the planet is what I'm trying to share with you. When you have a magnetic field that's shrinking and it brings the Van Allen belt in, what does that mean? You are putting two stressors on everything on the tectonic plate. So what is the best tuning fork for Emanuela or Matt to pay attention to is the things that are between the dynamo and the Van Allen radiation belt, because they will be metabolically stressed. What does that mean? The ATPase won't run at 9,000 revolutions per minute. And where you notice there's more idiots around you, that's where you shouldn't live. So, Emanuela, when you understand what I just told you, do you now understand when the aurora came down from Puerto Rico and went up to Brazil, why Uncle Jack went to the North Pole, went to the South Pole, and then went all along the Southern Ocean, 3 world cruises? Okay? Everybody knows I did it. You know, you remember I talked about it. It's everywhere on podcasts, but none of you ever realized what I was really doing. Because what was I doing? Fact-checking myself before I talked about it. Because now I know what it means. Now you know what it means. So when you have your little question about exercises in Canada and exercises in the Blue Lit Gym, it should no longer be a mystery why I say what I do, because it's blatantly obvious. And I expect you as the member to understand that now. Why? Because I've given you nothing but signal. And now I can tell you definitively, I have done that. So I want to see you resonate like a tuning fork on the tectonic plate and resonate that message to the idiots in Toronto, so that when I go on a radio station in Toronto and tell them this is why the Maple Leafs haven't won the cup since 1967, you hear that on the surface as a Canadian, you go, there's no way this guy's right. Well, Emanuela, I just told you how I'm right. Because nobody in Toronto can spin their ATPase faster than the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's the real reason.
That actually makes sense, though.
Of course it does. You know why it makes sense? Because it's decentralized science. And it's laid out right in front of you. Do you understand, Emanuela, now why I'm frustrated with people? Because I've been saying the same thing over and over and over to people whose ATPase doesn't work at 9,000 revolutions per minute. And it's about time that some of you begin to realize it. Why do I draw you to El Salvador? Because I know when you get there, you're going to fucking wake up. You just said it yourself. But you want to know why I failed? Because you're still in fucking Toronto. Exactly. But exactly. And that is the signal I'm looking for. When you really get it, when you understand that you're being pinched by two things that are zapping your life force, there is nothing else you can do. The EMF, the pills, the supplements, the exercise, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. What matters is you have to figure out the amount of magnetic inclination you need to keep the MITF/AMPAR pathway so that you're cognitively okay and you can still isotopically fractionate bad metals, because melanin is the only way we do that. I can't be any clearer than that. I mean, this is like the whipped cream and cherry on top of Alexis Cowan's podcast.
Well, I mean, the magnetism piece is, correct me if I'm wrong, but tied to where you live. And I feel like this is the reason why everyone keeps ignoring it.
Yeah.
Because
they're already biased to where they live.
Yeah.
I know that. But what do you know about me, Emanuela? Where was I born? New York City. Where do I live now?
El Salvador.
Ask yourself why. And what did I do? I'm like the vagus nerve. If you want to know the truth, my life is like the vagus nerve. New York, New Orleans, okay? Nashville, Mississippi, New Orleans, Destin, El Salvador. So what did I do in all those things? I kept going back and forth to figure out, okay, where do I do best? Where's the magnetic inclination for my MITF-AMPAR system? I think anybody who's ever listened to me, whether you like me or not, it doesn't matter. The one thing you know about me, the ATPases in my fucking brain spin better than just about anybody you're going to meet, okay? That's it. And what did I find out? Now that I'm an old fuck, I do better at the 13th North latitude. Why? Because the magnetic inclination here supports what my librarian needs. And I'm not coming off that. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to draw my tribe to this enclave so they can experience what I've experienced. And ironically, it's what Emanuela's experienced as well.
I think somebody with my history medically and whatever, everything needs to be in somewhere like El Salvador to thrive.
You got to understand what thriving is, because you can never understand how bad your life is back in a magnetic declining area. I mean, that's functionally what you're saying. And the reason I'm interrupting you here is not to be an asshole. There's going to be people that watch this and they're going to be like, they're not going to like this message. I'm just telling you. I mean, you know it probably better than anybody else. Why? Because you're one of my members and you listen to the people who are paying me. I got to fight with them almost every month on the Q&As. It gets to be fucking tiring if you want to know the truth. I mean, and then you have to fight with people who really don't get it.
I personally don't really understand too much people who struggle a lot with change. I may not have moved yet, but I'm getting my stuff in order. And me personally, just the way my life was, I'm the kind of person that I like change. I like turning everything upside down. But a lot of people around me really struggle with that. They just can't wrap their heads around.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I'm glad we're talking about this, because to me, this is a rubber meets the road podcast. Do you understand now why I deal, like I always tell people, my mouth's not a bakery, especially when we're doing Q&As, and I tell people, look, sometimes your friends and your family are the biggest anchors in your life. Well, guess what? When you understand what I just said, that magnetic inclination has to be yoked to your MITF-AMPAR pathway for you to function well. What if you tell me your mother's the thing that's hindering you? Like, so are you saying, okay, my mom basically doesn't understand any of the science, but she wants me to stay with her so that I become cognitively impaired like her? Do you realize how crazy that sounds when you actually do the math? I want you to think about it. You know what the smart move is? Say, Mom, I get it, it sucks, but put this apple in your mouth. Here's an energy drink. You're going to fucking El Salvador, where the energy drink and apple won't hurt you as bad. You need to bring people, because like the cognitively impaired should not be paid attention to at all. And this is the reason why, Emanuela, I am the penultimate mammal to make fun of them on Twitter. Why? Because I'm not somebody you can fuck with, because I understand the science inside and out. And I'm trying not to really down them. I'm trying to look at this like I looked at M&M conferences as a neurosurgeon. I'm trying to point out to people, if we continue to make these mistakes, people are going to continue to get hurt and die. Like when my member, Emma, died, it fucking bothered me to know. And my first ever farm member, I mean, I've never talked about it publicly, but two of our members, Nancy and Tom, know about this because they were friends with this lady. She was my first ever farm client. Literally, the first 2 hours I met her, I told her, if you don't listen to me, you're going to die. And she died. And I told her exactly how to fix the problem. Like, you couldn't have better GPS radar than I had for her. And guess what? Even though she was proximal to the answer, she died. So when you guys listen to podcasts and you don't fucking think I get it, I don't think you know who you're talking to.
You know what you said just at the beginning about my mom, no, I know you were specifically referring to my mom. I smiled actually because that's exactly what I did. I threw all your stuff at my mom. She became a member. She lives in El Salvador now. She sold all of her stuff there and she's been there for about 2 months. And my whole childhood, I remember thinking that my mom's personality was just that, like, her brain didn't work. Well, it works there.
And see, that makes me happy because you have an experience with your mom for your whole life. Now you see when the pilot light goes on, that it's almost like you have a new other person to explore and go through life with. To me, that's exactly what makes my work fun. When I hear stuff like this, that's what I love. Why? When people realize, stop listening to the fucking noise and plug into the signal, because guess what? Then the relationships you have with people, they explode. They're awesome.
Yeah, we've never really had much a relationship until I sent her all of your stuff. And
well, you did have a relationship. Why? Because you're quantumly entangled with your mom. Some of her cells are in you and some of your cells are in her. So you may not think there is a connection, but I think what you're saying, and I'm not trying to make light of this, your mom's GPS wasn't really connected well to the magnetic field in Canada, but it is now in El Salvador, and you're beginning to realize, wow, that's the lady, when she's cognitively intact, that I really want to learn and spend time with. I want to take my new baby and give it to my mom because this is cool. That is the essence of what I do, why I do it.
I want to ask you a question, I don't know if it's a good one, about deuterium depletion and cold. I did read the CT series, but it was a while ago. I'd have to go back and reread them. And it always pisses me off how everybody's referring to cold as a hermetic stress because, I can't do exercise. And yet my record is 28 minutes at 0.5 degrees Celsius. And all it does is makes me feel great.
Yeah, well, now you know the reason why, because when you're in Canada, that's the way you're defragging. You're actually mimicking exactly what the Weddell seal and the mammal does, the whale, when it dives deep. Because remember, the water's colder, it's more oxygen dense. People forget this. The other thing that happens is you're sending all your bad red blood cells to your spleen to be taken out. So you're deuterium depleting your blood at the same time, but you're doing it at a much faster rate. People don't realize that. And guess what? When you go back and read the CT series, because you haven't done it, you have new eyes now. I put a lot of new ideas in your head. So when I just said to you what I said to you about the spleen, I could see your eyes get big. You're like, oh, I missed that. And why did I mention it to you? We just had a Bitcoiner, a guy named Walker, who's married to a girl named Carla. You can find them on X. And she is 17 weeks pregnant, and she just got an atraumatic splenic rupture. So, of course, I went on their thread when people alerted me to this. And the doctors that are taking care of her, they saved her life by doing the surgery to take her spleen out. But here's the problem. They're all Rockefeller trained. They're like I used to be. They didn't know why the spleen would rupture in a pregnant woman. And the answer is pretty simple. she was isotopically heavy. In fact, the picture that she put on X really was offensive to me, but I didn't say anything because she's been going through it. She had fucking sunglasses on in the hospital room because her husband was getting ready to take her outside. And I'm going, let me get this straight. You just got your belly ripped open, have your spleen taken out, and you think it's fucking wise to wear sunglasses outside. That's why your spleen fucking exploded to begin with, okay? So the point I'm trying to make to you is when humans are ungrounded, that means not magnetically inclined. That's what it means. That's what grounding really is. And their blood is too thick, their CSF's too thick. What happens? The spleen, which hangs off your back part of your thoracic spine, sags. And when it sags, and you can't get rid of the deuterium from doing, say, CT or deep diving like a Weddell seal does, it gets to the point where it just ruptures because it's filled with too much mass. And that's what happens. And that can kill you. And do you really want to have your spleen removed when you understand it's one of the ways that we isotopically fractionate? Why am I telling you this story, Emmanuel? But I bet you're going to answer this correctly. What do you think the spleen is loaded with that no other doctor ever really learns in anatomy class?
Deuterium?
Melanin.
I did not know that.
It's just like the choroid plexus of not the brain, but of the gut. And what does the spleen really do? It's deuterium depleting your blood. That protects the Z-axis vortex in your heart and the CSF. See, it's not just the choroid plexus story. The spleen does the exact same thing for the mesenteric plexus. The mesenteric plexus is the plexus that comes off your aorta that basically gives the blood supply to your whole body. I should say your whole gut. So when you understand what the vagus nerve is doing, because it comes down on the y-axis and it hits every single place all the way down until your transverse mesocolon, utilizing the shake, rattle, and row program, anything that it doesn't get out, the spleen is designed to get it out and then also run it through the pancreatic bicarb system. So what does that tell me about Carla? Carla's vagal exhaust is busted. And you may be shocked to hear this, Emmanuel. Do you know that the spleen is innervated by the splenic nerve? Do you know what the splenic nerve is a branch of? The vagus nerve. How do you like that? And do you know that the pancreas is also innervated by the vagus nerve? All the beta cells are paying attention to all this. Your liver, if you want to know what fatty liver really is, deuterium in it. I've tried to educate Max Goulhane, but he keeps fucking listening to the retards in the food guru world, calling it visceral fat. No, it's not visceral fat. It's fucking deuterium filling your liver. And all you have to do is do a CT or an MRI, and you'll see the organs are hanging. And the reason why it's difficult to tell is because when it's suspended in fat, do you know why the visceral fat increases its mass? To try to carry the heavy organs in your gut because they're filled with fucking deuterium. This is how basic the idea is, but we have guys with MDs in Australia that think they're fucking smarter than they are. These are the idiots I have to deal with. And these are idiots I've done podcasts with, but they still believe it's tied to the food and not tied to the magnetic declination of the environment their patients are in, because that's the truth. And then when you casually point out to them on Twitter that, hey, by the way, do you know when you put deuterium in brown fat cells, it turns to white fat? And then when you put more deuterium in white fat cells, you get more white fat cells. Oh, that's a deuterium story too. Oh, but guess what? Uncle Jack's a quack.
I feel like I recently started drinking deuterium depleted water here, because it sucks here. And I noticed something interesting is that, like, I'm pretty strict on the leptin reset because another question related to blood and light observation. Anyways. And I noticed that after about 2 days of drinking it, I dropped like 4 pounds overnight.
So you dropped 4 pounds of deuterium.
Yeah.
And you have to realize when you say that, this is what people don't understand. I've done podcasts in the past with food gurus, and in fact, one of them didn't even post it. I think you may remember this. It was 2 food gurus that I told that eating cucumbers will make you fat, and they couldn't believe it. And I said, yeah, if the cucumbers are loaded with deuterium and you can't get rid of it, they're going to make you fat. Now, everybody kind of understands that the food gurus are retards. But what does this also mean? Does it mean when your vagal exhaust is blocked that just the act of drinking water can make you fat? The answer is yes. How do you like that for a mind fuck? So, why do I tell you this? Do you understand now why the paradigm of calories in, calories out is an absolute fucking joke? Because you know what the problem with biochemistry is? They never take this into account. The nuclear magnetic moment of atoms, and they never take into account the spins. And it turns out those are the single most important things, not the fucking biochemistry. And this is the reason why they're all retards, okay? And this is the reason why I'm not going to stop calling them retards until they come up to my level. Until they realize what they've been taught is incorrect. And when they see it and they begin to start doing CT scans and MRIs and seeing that all these organs are sagging in people, and you know what they should do when a doctor orders CT or an MRI or even X-ray? The number one question that should be taken on the order form is if there's any evidence of sagging, anatomic sagging, please comment on it in the impression. Now, the interesting thing about radiologists, because they're pretty dumb, they are really good at following directions. If you start putting that in your notes when you order it, they're going to start paying attention to it. You know what they're going to come to you and say? Just about every MRI I've seen has heavy, sagging organs. That's what my radiologist did when I told him to do it 15 years ago. And then I said, that's kind of interesting. And the next question out of the radiologist's head, because they started to think about why I asked them, and they said, Jack, what do you do with these patients when they have a positive MRI that has organ sagging? I said, I immediately do 2 things. I send them for a calcium index score, and I send them for a thermogram. And they all stop. They go, wait a minute. We don't do calcium index scores, and we don't do thermograms. And I said, I know you don't, because you don't understand why I asked you to look at the organs. And then the radiologist, at least in my hospital, said, will you tell me why? I said, sure. When deuterium is in an organ, it's a sign that the blood going through that organ is maple syrup. I said, what do you know about thermograms? It's paying attention to the blood flow to an organ. So I should see a big red blush in a thermogram. Guess what I see in someone whose organ is filled? A big white area with no blood flow. Why? Because it's inertially heavy. And what are you paying attention to? You're paying attention. What is a thermogram functionally doing? It's paying attention to the viscosity of the blood in that organ. Ooh. When you teach them a little biophysics, they go, wow, I didn't realize that. And then the next question out of their mouth was, well, why do you do a calcium index score? Because we don't offer that in the hospital. I said, it's pretty simple too. I said, if you know something about the gravity well, the z-axis, the heart, that's where all the deuterium is supposed to be, okay? And I said, then I teach them about the 4 ventricles. I should say the 4 chambers, 2 ventricles, 2 atria. I said, they're all designed to vortex the blood. This is what makes the other retards, the HRV guys, their life easy. They kind of know that blood flow is supposed to be chaotic because that's what the HRV tells them. But what they don't realize, it's so chaotic because it's pushing all the deuterium out on the outside of the vessel. Where's the signal? The inside of the vessel. Where the direct center of the vortex, that's where H plus is. That's where all the oxygen that's going to mitochondria really is supposed to be. What did nature do to prevent the vortex from shearing? It put an intim in there made out of elastin and fibrillin. Do you want to know what else it put in the vessel right in that area? POMC. So guess what? The neural crest cells, through evolution, through morphogenesis in mammals, always has melanin there. So I get a calcium index score because I know that wherever melanin is missing, the scene of the crime of murdering melanin will be a drop-off of atomic mass. What is that in humans? Calcium. That's what PAD is, peripheral artery disease. What does a calcium index score measure? Peripheral artery disease. Why? Because if you have it in your heart, by definition, you have to have it somewhere else. So what do? Do I go look at their aorta? Do I go look at their iliacs? No, that's something a vascular surgeon would do because they're retards too. I go straight to the vortex. I go straight to the coronary arteries. Why? It's the first artery off the aorta. To me, I want to go where the signal gives me the answer the quickest. So that's why I sent him for that. So the radiologist looked at me, he's like, so he goes, this is the reason why people that have heart disease have brain disease, and this is why all the stuff you've told us about carotid disease is important. I said, yes. I mean, the rules in vascular surgery have been the same through my whole career. If anybody has 60% PAD in the carotid, we don't do anything, we medically manage them. Anything above that, that's when you start thinking about it. Where does the surgery decision come? 70% or above. I tell the radiologist, if they have 1%, for me, it's a fucking deal breaker. Then what do? That's when I start talking to them about leptin prescription and cold thermogenesis program because of what you said before. Jack, I feel like a fucking rock star when I do this. Why? Because we're improving the spin rate of the vortexes in your blood and your CSF. And what does that do? It actually will stimulate it. What do I need Emanuela to do when you're doing this? I need to get your body naked, fully in the sun, to put back the melanin in the vessel wall, because then you won't get an aneurysm, which is what killed Albert Einstein. You won't get aneurysms in your brain. You won't get carotid disease in your neck. All from sunlight. Why? Because that's the other part. When you have a magnetic disconnection, that tells me that melanin is being destroyed somewhere else. Like, I know to look for it right away. Like, this is not a mystery.
So will your melanin get destroyed faster in a magnetic decline environment then?
Correct. And that's the reason I told you the game right now that all of you are learning. Why is this really important? I even said this to Alexis, that she's not a doctor, she's a PhD, that the answer now is when you understand that your patients are magnetically declined, that they are struggling to make melanin. This is the reason why people in Los Angeles can't get their vitamin D out, because it's so magnetically declined. So what's the game? The game is you have to figure out what environment for your biology, your N=1, has enough magnetic inclination so that you can make the melanin inside your head and your vessels. If you do that, you can live pretty well. It doesn't matter if the magnetic field declines a little bit, because you'll know that you are optimizing light, water, and magnetism for your mitochondrial colony. Who are the people that are the most at risk from magnetic declination? I told you in the Q&A this weekend, and you heard it. L haplotypes. They're in deep shit. If they don't get this message loud and clear, they're all going to die. In fact, just about every single one of my L haplotype patients, I'm thinking about them all, see if there's anybody, they all have familial hypercholesterolemia in their family. And they don't realize the reason why. And it's because the body is saying when we're magnetically stressed, we're going to make cholesterol to the max. Why? Because what is in the surface of the GPS system in the thalamus? The two liquid magnetic fats, DHA and cholesterol. So what is your brain trying to do? If it puts more of those magnetic fats around the GPS system, it makes the vortex in the ventricular system run faster. It's actually not difficult to understand, but you know what the problem is? If you take an L haplotype and they live, I don't know, in Pensacola, or they live in Chicago, the one that's in Pensacola thinks they're making the right decision at the 28th latitude, and then I point out to them, L haplotypes 0 to 5 degrees. That's where they're supposed to be. So guess what? That means to support the amount of melanin that their brain and the arterial tree needs is fucking way higher than they think. And this is the reason why black people, and I mean black people, African Americans, who are brought over here as slaves, you put them in the southeast of the United States and they do fucking terrible. Most of them have L haplotypes. Now you know the reason why. That's not a racial statement, it's fucking biophysics. But you know what? When they go see the centralized doctors in the centralized system you're in, or the allopathic one in the United States, do any of them get told this information? Of course not. Why? Because the Rockefeller curriculum has taught doctors the biochemistry without the story of water. That's the answer. And when you understand the game is to understand that water viscosity is a story of sunlight. You need that 0.66 electron volt light, which is near infrared light, to do proton conduction. And why is that proton conduction a big deal? Emmanuel, tell the audience, how does the ATPase work? Only with protons, right? Only with protons. And we have to put 9,000 protons per minute to make the whole system work. So when you actually see how all the parts fit, you go, oh, and then you realize that the ATPase has an FO head that spins with the magnetic dynamo. You're like, oh my God, this totally makes sense. And then I do the 2014 lecture at the Pasadena Convention Center that Dave Asprey threw me out of. Do you know what the topic of my talk was that day? Why is oxygen paramagnetic? Because it's drawn to magnetic fields. Like, y'all don't realize how long I've been telling this story, right? And when you saw how Dave Asprey reacted to it, because what is he? He's a guy that sells people deuterium in supplements. He got it right away. He said, no, I got to pull the stage from this guy. But to this day, some of my long-term members, they're now 12 years, they're going to listen to this podcast and go, I was there that day. I know exactly what happened. I saw the rug pull Dave tried to pull on Jack. Now you know, even though Dave asked me to come and invite me to his people, was my mouth the bakery? Was I going to sit there and lie to them like the other people that were in that audience did? No. I told the truth.
How important is it for someone to know their haplotype?
These days, doesn't matter anymore. When you live in a magnetically declined environment, haplotype is useless. Anybody who looks at my old work on the forum, I used to be a big believer in we needed to get it until I realized how bad the magnetic field was. That was the update that we got in 2014. When I wrote the quilt document, it was written in 2005. I knew what it was then. At that time, I didn't think the magnetic field, the failure rate was, as steep a slope as now I know it is today in 2026. And that changes the Lagrangian equation, because when that happens, it tells you that there's now a problem in all three of the symmetry equations. What are those three symmetry equations in the Lagrangian? It's QED, which is, electromagnetic. Then there's QCD, which is the proton one, which is the one we're talking about. And then the last one, which is the electroweak, which is where there's a breakage of time symmetry, and that's tied to the homochirality of why we pick certain stereoisomers for proteins versus sugar. When you realize that magnetic declination is a symmetry breaking event, haplotypes no longer matter. They mattered when humans evolved 2 to 4 million years ago. Why? Because what is the haplotype functionally? It is a link between magnetism and the QED. In other words, the two symmetries that you always see in that picture that I bought, haplotypes are a function of that. So the human Lagrangian haplotypes really mattered a lot. And that's why I pointed out to you earlier that black people who come from equatorial areas tend to be L or L1, or I should say L0, L1, L2, and L3. Those are different places. And then what happened, we migrated out of the East African Rift, and this should be important for you to hear, Emmanuel. You may not know this, but I posted this last night on the forum to Matt, who's struggling with what I'm posting. Did you listen to the April Q&A?
No, the one that happened on Sunday? No,
Yeah.
I did not.
All right, so when you post this, hopefully you go back, your homework is to listen to it. You're going to hear the first question from a guy named Carmine. He asked me about implications of the things you and I are talking now. And I mentioned to him, I want you to look at the Azores. Where did humans begin? We grew up in the East African Rift. That's where we came from, okay? East African Rift was where 3 tectonic plates all moved up and down, isolated some gorillas and chimps, changed the symmetry, and that's where we came from. Do you know that today, I shouldn't say today, since 1859, the East African Rift is unzipping? Do you know that? And eventually, the Red Sea, the Sea of Oman, is going to dump in and make a new ocean there. Where we come from. The tectonic plate, it's called the Nubian plate, is unzipping right now. Do you know why that's happening? The magnetic dynamo is weakening in that area. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that L0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s in that area have a huge problem when the ground, just so you know, you need an airplane now to get over this rift. That's happened in 150 years. So if one side of the plate is shrinking, does it make sense you should go look at the other side of the plate? And what does it mean? Well, that's where the Azores are. It does make sense. So I'm not going to tell you the answer here on the podcast. I'm going to make you go look at it, because when you understand what I'm saying, that the same thing that's happening to L0s, 1, 2, and 3 in the United States at the 28th, at the 33rd latitude, is happening in the fucking ground in Africa that they came from, then I just explained to you that question, the Lagrangian, the physics of everything, is in that one equation, because it's happening on Earth. Not only on the things that live on the planet, but on Earth. And it turns out that mammals are the most densely coupled animal on the planet to the magnetic dynamo. Why? That paper also got published. 540 million years, science has now proven Uncle Jack's intellect and wisdom correct, that we're coupled. And the reason why this paper is so difficult for biochemists, food gurus, and people like Eric Weinstein to handle is because everybody knows axiomatically that in Archean Earth, that's 4.6 billion years to 3.8 billion years, the Earth was anoxic. So why in the hell would everything be coupled magnetically to oxygen? Here's the big answer. What happens 575 million years ago? Cyanobacteria start making DHA in the ocean, and what did it make as a byproduct? Oxygen. What did I tell you before when Dave Asprey threw me out of Pasadena? That oxygen is paramagnetic. The Earth's magnetic field was pulling oxygen down to it. So guess what couples to magnetism? Oxygen in the water. That's what holds the tectonic plates together. And now you have evidence that the tectonic plates are opening up in the East African Rift where we come from and getting ready to fall into the Atlantic Ocean. Oh. So, does it make sense to you what I said to Matt now? Why it makes sense to you? Because whatever happens below the tectonic plates and in the Van Allen radiation belts is the metabolic stressor for every mammal on the planet. So fundamentally, this is the reason why you don't want to live in Toronto and have the same outcome as the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I just finished up the cross currents, and Robert Rebecca had like a belief that he wrote in the book that the decline in the magnetic field was caused by the introduction of technology, ELFs,
Yeah,
electromagnetic radiation.
I
But
know
you
that.
don't believe that anymore, right?
No, I guarantee if he was alive today, he wouldn't believe it either. And I can say this because I talked to him. I talked to him about the things that you and I are talking about now. When that book was written, none of this was known stuff. Like tectonic plates and all that, the magnetic dynamo, we didn't even have an accurate way to measure it. Now we measure it with the swarm satellites. Like even if you tried to get magnetic data on where you live now by using a magnetometer, it's not going to be accurate. You have to do it from space. So this is why I said to Matt what I said to him. This is also why I went on 3 world cruises. I know that the best tuning fork is the mammals on the planet and in the water. That is going to tell you where you want to live. What did you find out? Your story in the beginning of this podcast, you found out the same answer. Not by having a magnetometer. You put yourself in a magnetically inclined place compared to a declined place, and you went, I can drink coffee now. This is amazing. Okay, you just proved it. So let me tell you, because this is going to be instructive for you, let me tell you what Becker did prove, because this is why this guy was brilliant. In 1971, he was involved with some science with DARPA, where he knew that cosmonauts died in space from magnetic declination. And he made a comment in the electric body that, and it was a very small snippet, okay, that he felt that the Russians stopped their space program at that time because the way in which these astronauts died in a short period of time concerned the USSR. That was the first statement that Becker made. What did Becker do subsequently? The US Navy hired him to do the Seafarer thing in Wisconsin when he proved that the antenna would affect the magnetosphere above the Earth. The Navy, instead of telling you, buried the data. Then what did he do further? This is the most important thing for you to hear in this podcast. Him and Marino did the 765 kilovolt towers that run from New York City to Toronto, and they found out that one tower changes the Earth's magnetosphere 80,000 kilometers above the planet. So what does that mean? If you live around those things, you're inviting deuterium and tritium into your environment. Okay, that's what it means. Then Becker couldn't believe that. So what did he tell me when I talked to him? He goes, this is the reason we did the next experiment. The next experiment we did, it was Friedman, Charlie Bowman, and Becker decided to go to a place that had low light and pretty strong magnetism. This was the UK, and they looked at UK admissions to hospitals during geomagnetic events. Guess what they found? They found admission went way up when there was geomagnetic storms. What did Becker fundamentally do, but even today, people that read his books don't understand it? He basically proved that magnetic declination is a huge problem. And it's such a big problem that if you go to a place that should have pretty strong magnetism, which the UK should have, the effect is still there. And the reason for that is mammals evolved 320 to 220 million years ago when the magnetic field was literally triple the strength that it is today. And what has happened for mammals? It's gone down to where we are, at 50 microtesla at this point now. In certain places, it's even lower than that, which is what we've been talking about in the SAA. So when Becker did this study, and just so you and I are clear, Emanuela, he did the study in the 60s, the late 60s. So how long has Uncle Jack known about this? Pretty much my whole life. And when I realized that the osteoporosis that killed the Russian cosmonauts, the 3 cosmonauts in 1971, this is the reason why my neurosurgery mentor, Dr. David Klein, sent me to go do the book report for the residents on bone metabolism. Why? Because I was that guy. I like to put screws and rods in people as a neurosurgeon. And he was trying to teach me that maybe what I like to do wasn't a good thing to do to people. That's the real reason he gave me that. And he was not a bone guy. He was not a brain guy. He's a peripheral nerve guy. And he told me, he goes, what this guy found, Jack, completely goes against everything that I learned about bone and everything that I know you've learned and that we're teaching you. And he goes, because of that, this is the reason I don't like spine surgery. That's what he told me. And I'm going to tell you the year he told me this, 1989. Okay? After I did my homework on Becker, I gave the report to the residents in 1991. Okay? From that point on in my professional life, I became acutely aware of what the problem was. And we all know that space is magnetically declined. That's not an issue. So what did I realize? I started to focus a lot on space medicine. If you go back and look at the early Jack Kruse blogs, I talk about this like crazy. But here is the interesting part. I had no data back from 1991 all the way to probably 2005 about how significant the problem was on Earth. And if you go back and look, I'm going to point you to this. If you go back and read the osteoporosis series of blogs on the Jack Kruse site, what will it say? It'll say, is Wolff's Law inactivated on Earth? What does that mean in this podcast that you and I are talking about? Because you're laughing. You know, Jack is saying, are we astronauts walking on the tectonic plate? Am I not? That's what it means. And guess what? I told you this in 2005, but none of you realized what I was really saying. And you know why I couldn't say it out loud like I'm doing now? Because I didn't have the June 3rd, 2025 paper that proved my intuition that I got from Becker's work. In other words, I took Becker's work way past where he went, okay? And when I sat down with him 2 years before he died, and we had this discussion that you and I are having now, he had the biggest smile on his face. He was really happy. He's like, well, he goes, then it wasn't all wasted that they defunded my lab. He goes, because this story is eventually going to come out. And that's when he warned me. He goes, you better be fucking careful because they're going to come after you. I said, yeah, but I got a plan. I got a plan how I'm going to do this. And that plan is the reason why I will never dumb fucking anything down ever. I'm going to make you come to my level because when you see it for yourself, just like you said, your ATPase doesn't spin good in Toronto, but I got a little girl with not a lot of science background whose ATPase isn't spinning to find out that she can drink coffee when the magnetic field is inclined, not when it's declined. And to me, that proves that my insight from when I sat down with Becker was correct.
And all the other crazy things that happened there, you know, like I never lost a single strand of hair the time that I was there.
I know why, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a new member that's on the forum. I don't know if you've seen him yet, but he's got a great picture. He looks like he's got Bozo the Clown hair. And the question that he asked me actually yesterday, he goes, Jack, I have a problem with hearing. I lost my mid-frequency, this and that. And I said, well, that makes sense. Look at your hair. That's exactly what I said to him as a new member. Why? Because he lost the hair on his head, and that is topographically linked to the hair cells in his cochlea. And he had no idea. Do you know what pathway controls that, Emanuela? MITF and PAR system. And see, I knew that. I knew that right away. So wait, let me give it to you. I'm going to give you something good about this. So he started asking me all these kind of questions. I said, you basically need the shake, rattle, and roll protocol. I said, why? There's something you don't know. There's a branch of the vagus nerve that goes to the tympanic membrane. If you shake, rattle, and roll that one, your hearing will come back. And I said, when the vagus nerve exhaust blog goes live, I'll point it out to you. And he goes, are you serious? I said, dead serious. And this goes straight to what I said, the criticisms I had for Max Gilhane. Like, he's still telling people that visceral fat's the big problem. No, it means that the vagus nerve that goes to your liver is fucking shot. Okay, that's the celiac plexus. Okay? When you have diabetes, you have burned out the nerves that go, the vagus nerve that goes to the beta cells, also the celiac plexus. When your spleen ruptures, you have burned out the splenic nerve. When you get COPD, when you get emphysema, you have blown out the vagus nerve that goes to your lungs. When you have any type of vocal cord or neck cancer, you have affected the recurrent laryngeal nerve or the other laryngeal nerve that runs with it. Here's how sensitive the system is. On the left side of humans, the vagus nerve runs down from the jugular foramen straight down the carotid. And you know on the left side that it hooks around the arch of the aorta? On the right side, it hooks around the subclavian artery. Do you know why? Every time the heart beats, it's pulling on the vagus nerve. You're defractionating when you do that. So why do we have it on the left side versus the right side? What's the difference between us and monkeys? We talk, right?
Yeah.
Where's Broca's area? Left side, frontal lobe, right here. Same side as the hook around the aortic arch. Oh, and now, why am I talking about this? Because now in January of 2026, we have an astronaut that went up to space, got magnetically declined, and he stopped talking. Came back and has no stroke. And they can't figure it out. And I said, well, all you gotta do is put a vagal nerve stimulator in him on the left side, close to his voice box, and he'll start talking in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. That is pretty cool.
Well, guess what? When you understand biophysics, it's not crazy. Well, when you understand biophysics, you begin to understand really what a cochlear implant's doing. Cochlear implant works because you're putting huge magnetic power into the endolymphatic sac against a lattice that's locked from deuterium, and you're pushing the hair cells to move with huge magnetic flux from the outside. You know what the problem with that is? When you do that, you fry all the acoustic arrays in the brain. So this is the reason why everybody that gets a cochlear implant usually gets cognitive problems after it's implanted. They're all excited they can hear again, but guess what? The neurosurgeons that put it in and the ENT guys that do it, they have no fucking idea why they create Alzheimer's in those patients, but I do.
I want to ask you a question before we run out of time about blood and blood loss, hemoglobin, oxygen, magnetism, and what I was reading, what you were saying about how, so hemoglobin, right, in red blood cells absorbs UV light, and then the porphyrins basically emit light that sends a signal that connects to leptin pathway. Mm-hmm. And I just had an insight in things that happen to me, that when a woman experiences a lot of blood loss, like because, she's screwed up, menstrual cycle sucks, is she then making herself even more leptin resistant every time she loses all that blood?
Yeah, unless the blood is loaded with deuterium. I mean, that's what your period is designed to do every month. You are effectively deuterium depleting yourself with your period. The interesting thing is when women have problems associated with their period, that's how you know that there's so many other organs that are female related that are all deuterium bombs. Okay, so this tells you that fundamentally the thing that protects that system is the circadian system, because what does it do? The base chain of biology is to keep RNA and DNA clean. How does it do that? It makes sure that the methyl groups, the H on there, is not deuterated. So when you have a circadian biology problem, you are deuterating your main base chain. And that's what leads to the problem that you just mentioned. And remember what I told you, what's the circadian biology of red blood cells? This goes back to the spleen story. Every 120 days, we're designed to take our red cells out. What's the other thing that you need to put together with this question? So Jack, is this the reason why adult red blood cells have no mitochondria? Yeah, because if it did, because the blood is filled with 150 parts per million of blood, your blood would be fucking, ketchup. And it can't be like that. That's the reason why the heart has to vortex, so in the center of the blood, it runs really good. The problem is the deuterium is designed to stay in the blood. If it gets out in the tissues with a mitochondria, it's a problem. This also goes to what I had told Becker. What is the switch that he found that you now know about because you read the book that causes us to regenerate? You have to take your adult red blood cell and turn it back into an earlier form that's got mitochondria in it. What controls that? BCL11A, which is on chromosome 2, which is where POMC is, which is where the EDAR gene is that controls sweating, which is where glucagon is that controls the vagal exhaust. So all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, what makes us fucking human? It's all sitting there on chromosome 2. And what turns it on? And remember that podcast I did with Alexis Carrot, not the recent one, the one before it, when I admonished her and I said, Alexis, you're a bad PhD. You forgot 1 picoampere, which is 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere of the DC electric current is what Becker found does this. So what does that mean? That means melanin has to take that strong photoelectric signal from the sun and electrify it down really low. What is it doing? It's distributing the electrical energy through your whole body. That's effectively what DNA is. It's effectively what the circadian system is. It's effectively what your brain is. It's unfurling the Lagrangian to dissipate the energy to get to 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere. What pathway controls all that? MITF-AMPAR. So when you have the period problem and you see the macroscopic, I just took you back and forth through the microscopic and nanoscopic, you need to understand that this is just like I told you about paying attention to the mammals on the surface of the planet. When a woman has problems with bleeding and she doesn't feel better after her period, that's a sign that she's broken. Okay, that's a sign that her blood and her CSF is too thixotropic. That means it's more like ketchup and not like thinned water. Now, the last point I want to make to you, since I know you just had a baby, and I know this is important for you to put together, do you understand now what happens in women when they have an alien in their gut? They get something called hemodilution, but what happens? The red cell mass stays the same, but you begin to resorb water. What are you doing? You get so much water, your tits get big, your ankles swell, your ass gets bigger. All women are sad by it, but you're using the water to absorb more light energy into your system, and that energy is designed to go in the baby. What else unfortunately happens? The human placenta is also loaded with melanin. It's designed to fractionate melanin, I should say deuterium, so it doesn't go in the baby. What happens when a woman doesn't have that? The baby becomes a deuterium bomb. It becomes a coconut. So when you look at a coconut tree here, and then somebody tells you, yeah, my baby was born with trisomy 21, or my baby was born with some weird genetic disease like FCOH1, by definition, Uncle Jack says, okay, I already know something about mommy and daddy. Okay? That's transgenerational epigenetics. So the reason why this is important, your period tells me a lot about the system you're in. And what's the thing I'm the most interested in? Is the thermodynamics of the blood. That's why I told you thermograms give you a lot of information. So women could start doing monthly thermograms at home because they're not expensive to do. You can go find an imaging place in your place, and what you should do is tell them that you want them to image your vagina, your breast, your face, and I would do probably my crotch because that's where the big iliac arteries are, the femoral arteries. Like, do all those places and look to see if there's a change. What you'll notice that before and after your period, there's thermodynamic changes. I should say thermographic changes. And then you'll begin to understand, so that's the reason why I'm supposed to feel better after my period. This is the reason why MS patients always want to be pregnant, because they're unloading deuterium to their children. They can't fractionate it themselves, so they give it to their kids.
And then their kids are going to be messed up.
Well, yeah, but unfortunately, the Rockefeller paradigm is so broken that the women never get told what I just told you. But as being a member on the forum, how many times have you seen somebody asked me a question, hey, should we have a baby? There's a person on the forum right now that just asked me the question literally in the last 4 days. Yeah, me and my girlfriend live in San Diego and we got all these problems, but we want to have a baby. I'm like, bro, are you fucking kidding me? This is like the last place you want to have a kid, especially the condition you're in now. Why? Doesn't mean that the baby's going to turn out with 3 eyes or autistic or have a brain tumor. But what it means is that the likelihood, the probability is much greater because the baby's base chain is going to be heavily deuterated, which is what we're trying to avoid. And that scales to exactly what happened to the cosmonauts in space that died. They became heavily deuterated after being in space for 280 days. That's exactly what happened to the 2 twin astronauts from the United States, the Kelly brothers. One stayed on the ground, one went up. What did we find out? When the one that went up came down, they checked the DNA methylation pattern. They found that the astronaut that went in space was heavily deuterated. His brother had nothing, but yet they're identical twins. So what does that tell you? It tells you the answer. That when you go up in space, not only do you have no magnetic field, but you see the sunrise 19 times a day. And that ruins circadian biology, which is designed to keep you isotopically pure. But what's the backup system? The magnetic field. The magnetic field makes it so that you can keep your oxygenation rate up. And Emanuela, because I'm giving you high-level signal here, how many times have I showed you that picture from tyrosine to melanin? And what do I always tell you? When you become hypoxic, that's how you break melanin down to dopamine, right? So do you understand now why magnetic declination destroys melanin, turns it into dopamine? And that's a real problem, because then you become a low dopamine idiot that never realizes you can fix your problem. Okay? This is when you sign up for OnlyFans. It's when you start gambling money. It's when you start buying shitcoins. It's when you start to rely on AI, because your fucking brain can't think. That's exactly what happens. That's why most of the Bitcoiners all have ADHD, OCD. They're on the spectrum, and they don't realize why. And they also don't realize that's why a lot of people in your generation are nihilistic. This isn't critiques on the generation. It's fucking biophysics 101. And when you understand it, which I do, all these things make sense. The real hard thing is trying to talk sense to someone whose ATPase only spins at 6,000 to 7,500 RPMs. That's my hell. That's my prison.
That's where you got to kidnap them, put a thing on and shove them.
Well, I'm kind of hoping that they listen to your podcast and you tell them, hey, look, my ATPase spins better in El Salvador and I can drink coffee there. So, to me,
I don't stink.
Yeah, right.
That was pretty big considering how much you sweat there.
Yeah. Well, look, it's funny that you say this. The guys that early released all this Alex Jones stuff that's pissed me off? I have to tell you this story. One of the guys who you didn't see, they didn't put him on the Alex Jones clip. He was a vegan from the United States. He sat at the table I'm looking at right now during this whole conversation. And it's so funny. He brought me a watermelon. And as soon as he walked in, I said, dude, get fucking rid of that. There's no chance I'm eating that. And then he started talking to me. This guy's brain could not work at all. He was so magnetically declined. And then what did he tell me? He lives in Kansas. And I'm going, okay, based on the new USGS data, that is probably the worst place to live in the United States. Okay? That and Austin, Texas are probably neck and neck. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God. And I tried to explain to him, Because he couldn't figure out. He goes, well, why does my body look good, but my brain doesn't work? I said, you're the opposite of Jack Kruse. My brain is got a huge magnetic field. My body, not so much. And I said, part of the reason for that is because the last 5 years of my life, I had to go back to magnetic declination to figure out COVID and to figure out this whole issue that now we know is going on that the governments are blocking us from. And he sat there and he goes, it can't be that. And I said, what do you mean it can't be that? And he goes, that blows up my whole paradigm. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you thought it was, about food. You thought about eating raw food and doing all this. It's good. And then I said to him, your GPS system is so bad. And then magically he says to me, by the way, he goes, I don't have any teeth, posterior teeth. And I'm going, you clearly haven't read my work because teeth are neuroectoderm. I said, those are part of your GPS system. I said, anybody who's a vegan, who's in a magnetically declined place, be ready, because not only will your hair fall out, so will your teeth. And you're sitting there laughing right now because you know this stuff because you're a member. But the problem is there's going to be people that watch this that aren't members, that don't know the lessons that I teach you guys. And when you see it and you put it together yourself, you go, wow, that's the reason why it's fun going on these cruises and talking to people that truly have no clue that they're already dead and they haven't laid down in the coffin yet because they can't think. Like when you tell them the signal, they're like, no, I can't believe that. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I know, I get it. Like I tell them, I get it. I just had a member on the forum who was just like that, and I had to fire her. I fired her yesterday. I just couldn't tolerate reading her threads on the forum anymore because it would make my blood pressure go up. Because I kept giving her the lesson and she didn't get it.
Not only that, but what I found funny about that story is that I was raised a strict vegetarian from 0 to 26. And I think the only reason why I survived is because my mom was anti-tech. We spent our whole lives outside.
Well, see, then you have to give your mom a kiss because that is probably the thing that saved you. And I do agree with you. It's a good thing. It's kind of like, I guess what you're teaching people in this podcast. You can do a lot wrong and still make it, even in a magnetically declined planet, which is part of the reason why I think the people that are all like in a tizzy over what happened with the early release on Alex Jones, I think everybody thinks they're going to die in fucking 2 weeks. No, this process, I tell people magnetic declination based on the best data I've seen, it's happened between 300 and 500 times on Earth. We've only had 5 extinction events. So if you look at the math there, you're like, yeah, this probably isn't going to be, a pole flip event. It's probably not going to be an extinction event like the other 5. But what is it going to do? It is going to destroy the penultimate mammals. It's destroying the birds. It's destroying the bees. Anything that's magnetically linked is getting taken to the woodshed. And if you haven't been brain dead for your whole life, just look to your left and look to your right. This is why autism is here. This is the reason why, the last magnetic decline event is the last champ event. I talked about it in the Q&A. What happened? What's the most famous thing that happened there? In your neck of the woods in Canada, we lost the megafauna. What's the other thing? We lost the Neanderthals. We became the Neanderthals. That's why there's no missing link. We're them. Because we shrank the brain 125 grams. Why did we do that? To make the vortex run faster when we went up higher. But what's the most impressive part of the last magnetic decline event? This is when we lost an elephant called the woolly mammoth that lived where you were in Toronto. And why did we lose the woolly mammoth? The same reason the Neanderthal became human is people don't realize elephants, they're Ligrarian, is they grew up in the same environment that we did in the East African Rift. Their brains are 22 pounds. They have a lot of CSF. But why is their brain so big? Why did elephants have to encephalize? Remember, our superpower is the frontal lobes. The elephant superpower is in its trunk. It's got 100,000 muscles. So that's the reason it had to encephalize. What did it do compared to its neighbor, the rhino? The rhino has one horn, it's always grounded, has a small brain like a dinosaur. Why? Its skin is thick, it's armored. So it always has to stay grounded to the magnetosphere to keep its melanin. It doesn't have a big brain to support, so that's why its skin can be thick. But yet they grew up in the same environment. But what I'm trying to point out to you here is the librarian for each animal was different. What did it pay attention to more to do the things it needed to do? And that's the difference between us, chimps, and gorillas too. Because we come from them, and when you think about this, you go, okay, so the path to chimps stopped at Neanderthals, and Neanderthals had to shrink their brain because we went through a magnetic decline event 42,000 years ago. It happened again 11,000 years ago in Canada, where we lost more megafauna. You know, those are big animals. Why? Your question to me when I tell you this immediately should be, Jack, why is it when we have magnetic decline events that animals that are coupled seem to look different in the ocean versus on the land? So let me explain to you. If you go talk to fishermen everywhere in the world, they'll tell you that they used to catch fish that were monsters. Anytime oxygen is high, animals get bigger. That's why we got dinosaurs. It's why we had some big mammals. It's why we had some, the megalodon shark, at one time. But it's also why in the Carboniferous period, insects got to be the size of 747s, okay? What happens when oxygen goes down? Things get smaller but more efficient, okay? So fish are shrinking. Here's the interesting thing. They live in an electron-dense, oxygen-dense environment. We're mammals that are also coupled to the magnetosphere. What's happening to us as it shrinks? We're getting fatter. The reason we're getting fatter and bigger, okay, is to protect the vortex spin in our head. Why? Because fat is designed to be deuterium depleted. That's the mammal superpower, is that they turn blue light into fat, okay? What is that designed to do? The superpower human librarian is so that we can get to a different point in the space-time continuum that we don't have to worry about deuterium and tritium falling down from the Van Allen radiation belt. So you're going to use your own fat to survive. That's the hardware that's built into us. Now, the problem is it going to save people, who are grazing 6 times a day, in Toronto, like a vegetarian? No, you know that now. But that's the whole point of understanding all this, because the decisions that people are going to have to make the next, 50 to 250 years, this magnetic map is going to change. It's going to continue to change. If you think that it's not going to, then you didn't listen to what I really said to Alexis Cowan recently. What did I say? In 2005, if I would have lost $1 million if I was in Las Vegas to see what it is now in 2026. But I have to be honest with you, I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, my eyes, the Windex is now on my glass eyes. Everybody needs to start paying attention to where magnetic declination is the worst. Why? Because it's going to change. And where do I know best to look? Any place that magma is flowing out of a volcano is generally going to be a good thing. What did I tell the membership? If you see an aurora around your area, probably not a good place for you to be, okay? If the fish are dying, if the bees are dying, if you start to see more people that are neurocognitively impaired in your friend's zone or your family zone, you probably want to think about picking up your tent and moving, somewhere else. Those are the things that I want people to pay attention to. Do I want you to learn how to defrag? Yes. That's a lot of the stuff that's coming out on the blogs now about, chewing mastic gum, using deuterium depleted water, the shake, rattle, and roll protocol, the volcano protocol, all these things that literally, if you go to the website form, they're all there already. I put 50 extra blogs in the last 3 months because now that I have the map, I have a duty to my tribe to tell them, look, you're the guys that I care about. You're the ones that cared enough to sign up to actually learn this stuff. So why in the fuck wouldn't I give it to you first? You may not use it, but you deserve it. You know, you're paying for my time to do this stuff. Everybody else, no. I'm not going to be putting this stuff on Twitter. I'm not going to, look, if you don't care enough about getting this advice for $5 a month, I mean, what the fuck? You're telling me how you value, you know, the truth. So you've told me all I need to know about you, you know? I mean, when you're on the internet and you give me this bullshit, well, it should be free. I'm like, well, why do you pay for a cell phone to get on Twitter or Facebook to follow me? I mean, you valuing that, the technology, more than this. And what did Emanuela just say? Here, I'm eating fucking fruit bombs, but my mom saved me because she didn't let me have a cell phone. She made me go outside all day. Well, Emanuela, you just taught them the lesson that I tried to teach them. No, you can't learn biophysics on Twitter. Okay? You need to jump in. You need to do what Emanuela did. Get off your ass in Toronto, run down to El Salvador and see if you can drink coffee.
All the other crazy things, they all happen. You just got to pay attention.
Yep. But see, that's the good thing, that you suspended your belief. I mean, anybody who listens to this is going to look at you going, God, she's done everything wrong. She's the wrong haplotype in the wrong place. She was vegan. She had a baby. Her ATPase wasn't spending it. And now she's kind of figured it out, because what did she do? She picked up the tent, moved it south, and paid attention to our body. I mean, it's the same story that I just told our electrical engineer buddy on the forum, Matt. He can't believe the stuff that you and I just talked about in this podcast. Hopefully he'll read this, because what I taught him last night, I said, Matt, all the tuning forks are around you. When I was on that cruise ship going from Peru to Australia 7-8 months ago, if you ever have the opportunity to talk to Chantal, ask her if she saw a group of sicker people in her life. Remember, she's a nurse. We couldn't believe it. Like, this was like being in a Disney ride with people who are getting ready to die in 3 months.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
It is. It was nuts. But why did I take the trip, Emmanuel? To actually see what the tuning forks in the Southern Ocean were doing. So I got my answer. In other words, the paper from June of 25, I now know that paper is showing up on the tectonic surfaces where the SAA is spreading. And it's spreading in a very specific way. It's going from South America directly towards Australia. And if this effect is already in Australia, boy, that tells me that the Southern Hemisphere is in for an ass-kicking next 50 years.
So I want to you said something that reminded me of something, and I want to tie that in, because I actually started doing this podcast because I realized that everybody seems to think in a way that I don't. And I think part of that was because I spent so much time outdoors, and also, my mom was never sunscreen, so I didn't wear sunscreen until I started, I guess, getting dumber when I had my first kid. My sister and I used to compete for our tan, maximum skin. We had horses, spent tons of time outside. And I realized before I started this that, my horse recently passed away, and the decisions I made on his last day were so radically different than the things that I see other people making decisions. Like, I'm just going to sit here outside alone. I don't need to ask anybody else. I have, coming from I went from strict vegetarian to eating mostly seafood and meat, and I didn't have a problem doing that 180. And then to hunting animals, and people around me were like, how do you change so much? So can you maybe explain from, the biophys, the brain side, how is it that my environment caused me to have an easier time with change, an easier time with changing my beliefs, and an easier time with like it doesn't bother me if one day I was telling people how being plant-based was the best, and then the next day later I was like, oh, that was all wrong. I could do that.
this is probably the simplest question you've asked me, because you asked me at the right time at the end of the podcast. The ATPase is spinning faster. What does that mean? Oxygen levels are up, magnetic inclination up, dopamine became melanin. It didn't go the other way. When you shunt from dopamine to melanin, you get smarter. That's the human librarian. The smartest people are the people that have more dopamine, I should say, more melanin in their head by the neural crest cells. In other words, you're not pissed off by low dopamine things. Like the people that I told you on the forum that I just cut, they were all low dopamine. Why? Because they were choosing to go magnetic declination. I'm like, okay, good luck. You're doing better? Great. See ya. I know they're not going to do better, but you know what? They have convinced themselves that they can't get rid of the anchors in their life. They can't get rid of their wants, needs, and desires. And what I'm saying to you very clearly, this linkage between the magnetic dynamo and your brain is very clear cut. It's the battleground of the human librarian is happening on the inner mitochondrial membrane. The faster that ATPase spins, the more dopamine becomes melanin. The more melanin stays melanin, it fractionates, the better you think. It's that simple, Emanuela.
Awesome. I was going to add something about the music thing, because that reminded me I was only interested in music and creativity when I was at the worst when it came to light, and then when I started doing all that, I didn't care about it at all.
But now you know why. When I sat down with Rick Rubin and I told him that creativity is a linkage to brain damage, and he just smiled, because you know he doesn't want to hear that, but it's true. And if people think that I'm bullshitting them, this is why I tell the story about the last champ event, because what happened, I did, just so you know, for the Bukele administration, I did a talk in Palestra, and I think it was 2024, yeah, 24. And in that, I used the Trevi fountain and cave art as the proof of how this happened. I said, when Neanderthals shrunk their brain, art showed up in caves. Why? You can't have art without having melanin destruction and dopamine creation. I said, we're the species that proves we all think that creativity is a benefit, and what the librarian says is exactly the opposite. It's proof that you're a brain damaged primate. And when I laid that off for Rick, I mean, he had the biggest smile as you did on your face, because when you realize it, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to tell Pearl Jam that. I don't know if I want to tell Metallica that. But it's kind of funny because the science is there. When you actually see it, and I remember when I did the talk for Palestra, I don't think any of them got really the impact, because I was trying to scale it to them. I said, when the magnetic declination began, why did I pick the Trevi fountain? You can go back and look. When it was built, it happened right around the Carrington event. That's when magnetic declination began on Earth. This is the new event. I call this extinction that we're in, and it's probably really not good to call an extinction. It's probably better to call it a mini last champ event, began at the Carrington event, and that's when we built the Trevi fountain. And we were very, very artistic. You know, you think about Monet and Degas, and all that stuff happens at, you know, the late 1800s and into the 19th century. Then what happens? Then we get Cubism. Then we get even more low dopamine stuff. Then we really get the lowest dopamine stuff, Jackson Pollock. This is all a sign from the Carrington event, and it's around us in our artwork. Like, I'll give you an example here in El Salvador, because, you know, you've been here. One of the things that the Palestra guys asked me to talk about, because this was the basis of the talk, the Bukele administration wants to find a new culture. And I said, you realize that you're in one of the few places that has magnetic inclination? So I said, who you invite down here, you have to invite people here that see the world differently, kind of like you do. I said, because if you want to change, you know, bricks and mortar, concrete, simple construction, to artisans, it's a totally different flavor. And it's ironic that you and I are talking about this right now. because I'm in my new place in Costa del Sol, and these are Salvadoreños building a place that they have never seen before. Like, they're all learning on the job. And if I showed you what this place looks like, this doesn't look like El Salvador. And I told them that this is linked to what the country needs. Why? In order to improve the situation, you have to get people outside, you have to get their melanin going, and what you'll start to see is they will change and turn the razor wires into things that are beautiful. They'll start to realize, like the architect, the number one architect in this country, his name's Ava Hines. I own her house, okay? When you walk in the house, it's all bland colors, no big, beautiful flowers. It's very low dopamine design. And what was the first thing I did? I bought the biggest splash of color in this fucking house that you can ever imagine. I put Bougainvillas everywhere. And part of my palestra talk, I used the Bougainvillea as the example of magnetic declination. And they didn't even know that their own flower that's here is actually tied to this story. And then I even showed them door handles from Europe and the United States. I said, look at this door handle that was made in 1871. I said, look at the one that's in Home Depot right now in America. I said, if that doesn't tell you magnetic declination is present, nothing else does. I said, tell me when's the last time we built something truly beautiful in the United States. You know what it was? The Chrysler Building, Art Deco. If you look at the building that was built the next year, right next to it, that's the Empire State Building. You want to look at the ugliest building ever built in the United States? The Twin Towers that got knocked down. I remember as a little boy, I was there the opening day, okay, in 1973. And I will never forget, was in the New York Times. They were on the case of the Japanese architect that built it and said, this is the ugliest fucking building ever. And when I got a little bit older, one of the ladies that was in the Museum of Natural History told me the story of Jean Calment, that she was the oldest living human, 122.4 years. One of the things that she did in her life is she was there for the opening of the Eiffel Tower and then there for the 100-year anniversary. She told me the story that I'm telling you right now, that at the time the Eiffel Tower opened, that the guy who built it, Eiffel, was filleted in 1890 or 70, whenever it was, Paris, because people thought it was ugly as fuck. Now, it's the icon of Paris. Why? Because of what you and I are talking about. It is a low dopamine. Everybody's like, oh, this is us. But back then, everybody was like, this is disgusting. And what I'm trying to say to you is, artists are always low dopamine people because they're isotopically damaged. They get to see the world as it is. And guess what they do? They transfer it to their artwork. So this is the reason why art and physics has this link. Just like the link that you said before about you and your mom. Your mom to you is a new piece of art that has opened your eyes because now she's changed. The interesting thing is with this art that we're talking about now, you don't see it that way because you don't know what the belief, the zeitgeist of the day was when the art came out. And the funny thing is, one of the guys that was at this Palestra event is a guy named Fen de Fuers, and he's from Europe, I think Belgium. And he is an Art Deco artist, and he said, my business is almost destroyed in Europe because everybody hates Art Deco art. And I said to him from the stage during my talk, the reason they hate your art is because they're all fucking low dopamine. They're into modern fucking garbage, like Kuhn's dogs that sell for $40 million, that are stainless steel and polished. I said, they think that's art now. Why? Because they're all brain damaged. And when you say this to another artist and he looks at you, and I had never met this guy before, and I said to the Bukele administration, I said, you need to hire this guy and put one of his statues in one of our parks on Jerusalem Avenue. Why? Because I also use Jerusalem Avenue in my talk to show people what Bukele was really radiating to his people. That it's a new world now. We're gonna do things different. Why? Because Bukele's brain is magnetically inclined. And if you want to know the difference between Bukele and Trump, Donald Trump is a boomer that is magnetically declined. Same thing with Biden. That's why he was shitting in diapers with Macron, and it's the reason why Macron's married to a man. It's all there. You just have to look at it yourself. I mean, you got your own set of issues with Trudeau and Carney. These are the tuning forks we need to be paying attention to that are being declined. And when you understand this, you will have the realization. The positive connotation for you is what you picked up at your mom. The negative connotation is what I just brought out with you, with Carney, with Trudeau, with Trump, Macron. But here's the cool thing that I'm going through. I got a president that I know is magnetically inclined. So when I go around here and see everybody smiling, happy face, that was the thing that made it easy for me not to go to Mexico and come here. Because I still see the same brown people in Mexico, but the brown people in Mexico are not as happy as they are here. Why? Because they don't have as much magnetic inclination as we have here. And that is the main reason that I made the decision 5 years ago. I said, this is my tribe. This is where I'm going to die. Why? Everything is coming back online here. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
And I hope to do this again in the future.